Okay. So welcome everybody. So I just want to talk a little bit about last week. Talk about a little bit about how everybody's topics are coming along and some upcoming assignments to start things off. So first thing I'll do is I'll do the usual. I'll make sure I'm recording. I am, and so I just want to talk a little bit and see how everybody's topics are coming along as far as their research areas. So at this point, you should be really thinking about what topics you want to be considering for your thesis and capstone projects. If you don't have a topic nailed down just yet, that is okay, but you really want to think about nailing down a specific topic. So at the very least, hopefully you have a group or an area, kind of a hierarchical area that you would like to explore for the research you're going to be doing. But if you have any questions about any specific topics, or if you have ideas that you want to bounce off me, please do that. It's always okay to send me an email and maybe send a couple sentence write-up about what you think your topic, your potential topic is about, and to get my feedback on things. I'm always available for you folks. And as always, feel free to reach out to other SE faculty members if you're interested in working with them for your thesis or capstone project. If somebody is a expert in a specific area, you should always feel free to reach out to them and say, hey, what do you think about this topic? Do you think this topic is something that's interesting? Do you think it's relevant? You can always do that, but always feel free to bounce that idea off me first to get some initial feedback. The next thing I want to talk about is a couple upcoming assignments. So I'll just scroll ahead to the course schedule. And so what we have is, as far as week 5, we have the A2 paper reviews. So if you look at the assignment 2 paper reviews, so we did talk about this a little bit, I think last week, as far as choosing a paper from this year's ICSE or FSE conference. So, and you would address each of these areas. So hopefully you've submitted that already. And for the upcoming assignment, this is your problem statement. So this is where we are beginning to move into the actual final project for this semester. And so this assignment is due next week. And you can find information about this assignment by looking at by going to the project link at the top of the page. And this is the first deliverable, the problem statement. And so after you narrow down your research interest into one topic, one main area, you want to do something, you want to create a problem statement. Now, writing this problem statement is probably going to be one of the hardest things you write, and it will take you some time. But the problem statement should clearly and concisely describe the issue you are trying to address. So you want to eliminate ambiguity. You want to be right to the point. You want to make it very clear to the reader what you're going to be solving, what the problem you're looking to solve. And it should be really no more than 1 or 2 paragraphs in length. So what we'll end up doing is after you create your problem statement, I'll be giving you folks some feedback on it. If you have any questions on your problem statement before you submit it, you can always email me your problem statement, any thoughts you have on it. What I would like for you to do is for you to use LaTeX to create this and all subsequent deliverables. I think I mentioned before that Overleaf is a really good LaTeX resource, and you can view a link to that inside of the resources page. And underneath using LaTeX, there's a link for you there. I would really prefer that you use LaTeX. If for some reason you cannot, this doesn't mean you're going to fail or anything like that, but I'd really prefer that you begin using LaTeX for this and all future submissions. So again, the problem statement is the first deliverable for your concluding project. If after you create the problem statement, you decide to alter it, that is 100% okay. It's to be expected. It's kind of like a requirements document or design document. It's kind of expected that you're probably going to update it as the term progresses. So if you need to update it, totally fine. If you want to change your topic completely, that is totally fine as well. like I mentioned a couple times, the main objective for this course is to get you to have a good idea for your thesis or capstone project. And so that's what I want to focus on. If you do that, we've succeeded. So if you decide to change your topic in a week or two, feel free to bounce it off of me, but that is 100% okay, right? So I think that covers everything as far as what's coming up for this week. Just to kind of give a heads up for the week after, there is a literature review due. I'll talk about the literature review a little bit more next week. But just give you a heads up, there is a literature review coming up after next week. So with that said, I'll just jump right into the lectures for this week. So what we're going to talk about this week is research methodologies. There's a lot of good ways to conduct research, and there are a lot of bad ways to conduct research. Just like there are a lot of good ways to create software and a lot of bad ways to create software. And there are a lot of different methodologies you can follow. The same idea applies to doing good research. If you follow a bad research methodology, you're probably going to get not so good research results. Just like if you follow a inappropriate or bad software development methodology, you're probably not going to create software that's on time, on budget, high quality. So just kind of an overview. What we're going to cover today is we'll talk about what is an overarching question, research problem, hypothesis, literature review, collect data, analyze and interpret data, trace the question back to the hypothesis along with the results, and talk about if the results support the hypothesis or they don't support it, and do the results provide some answer to the question. I should correct myself and say this is actually more of an overview of what a paper should look like, and really what a research methodology should look like. So generally, any type of research that you do will follow these same steps. You're going to talk about what the main overarching question is. You're going to define a problem. You're going to define some hypotheses. You're going to do a literature review. You'll collect the data. You'll analyze the data, and then you close the loop and say, does that data support or not support the hypothesis and that you have? And so, generally speaking, all research will follow these same 7 steps. And you may notice in the papers that you read, they generally follow these same steps. And so we'll talk about some of those steps today. So the first question is, why plan? Why have a research plan? And like I said, the same idea applies as for having a good research plan as having a good software development plan. So having a good research plan will really help you plan out so you need to know what to do and when to do it. You're going to need to create a study that is repeatable, not only for you but for others. And if others can't repeat your study, that's generally considered not to be a very good study, and you'll probably get dinged both by your advisor, and any potential reviewers won't like it as well. So you need to be very clear in how you do your study and to make it repeatable. You need to identify and control variables, and so variables in your study are any things that can change, and so you want to make sure that you're controlling these variables in your study. You need to know how to measure success. You need to say, this is how we measure success for our study. This is how we'll know that we can accept or reject the null hypothesis. And finally, you can identify weaknesses ahead of time. So just like any type of planning, when you identify a research plan, that'll help you identify roadblocks, potential hurdles down the road, maybe things that would inhibit you from doing your research. And so a plan can really help with those areas. One of the things you're going to see is that collecting data is very important. Now, most of your projects will need to collect data in some way, shape, or form. Now, this data could be empirical data from a version control repository, or it could be doing developer interviews. Your data can come in many, many shapes, sizes. And some of the things you'll want to plan out is how to get good data. So when I say good data, I mean good amounts of data, appropriate data. How are you going to ensure that you're getting this? Second step would be how you're going to get the data. Are you going to get it by doing developer interviews? Are you going to give any kind of incentive for those developers? Are you going to collect them version control repositories? And it's important to know that sometimes getting data is impossible. Sometimes you may want to collect specific types of data and you just can't collect it. I mean, it's just not available. And there's something to anticipate. There's something to plan for. Other things you'll need to do is determine how you'll ensure the accuracy and reliability of the data you're going to collect. It's very, very easy to collect bad data. And this bad data could be data that's not representative, not properly representative of the audience you're trying to study. It could be incomplete data, it could be old data, but it's very hard to ensure that you're collecting good, reliable, and accurate data. So your plan will help determine that. Your plan will also determine how you can make the study repeatable, and it'll also help you to make sure your data is good. When I say good, I mean that it's appropriate for your study and that it's actually accurate. And getting data is frequently a challenge. I can't tell you the number of projects that I thought that would be very good projects to do. They'd be very good studies to do. But I just couldn't get good data for that study. And sometimes it slowed me down by 6 months, and other times it said I couldn't do the work. So getting good data is often very, very, very difficult to do, as you'll see. So having data creating good data sets can actually be a project in itself. Now, creating a good data set and publishing it is probably sufficient for a capstone project, probably not a thesis project, unfortunately. And some conferences even have venues just for data projects, data-related projects. So one is MSR. They have a data track. Now this is for the 2017 data track conference, but in the future you can search for the most recent year's venue. And if you were to click on this link, which I will do, this will show the 2017 conference link. And it talks about the data showcase. And very frequently, data is useful to a lot of researchers. And my 2 cents says that if you are a capstone project, it's actually a really good way to disseminate your work. A lot of times it just involves you rolling up your sleeves and collecting the data and writing code and actually storing the data and making it publicly accessible to others. But I think it's a really good way to disseminate your work in a lot of cases. So this is something that if you're doing a capstone, you may want to consider. And I would advise that you search for recently published data papers. And that will help give you an idea of some of the things they're looking for. If you are considering a data paper, you don't want to create data that somebody else has already created, meaning you repeat somebody else's work or just do a slight improvement. You want to create data that people actually really care about. And this is something that's very important to talk about with your advisor because they can help direct you. So for your project, you're going to want to think about how you can actually collect the data. So what will you need? How will you get it? Can you get it? How will you ensure that the data is good quality data? And like I mentioned, that sometimes getting the data is a project in itself. I've worked with students and they've spent 6 months just creating projects to collect data. There's nothing wrong with that, especially for a capstone style project. So for whatever project you're planning, this is something to consider. Okay. So when you're selecting your data, you should consider that data is intended to represent reality. If you're doing a study and you're maybe trying to say, do people like cheeseburgers? And you do this study by interviewing people that leave McDonald's, you're probably not getting a good representative audience. Your data is going to be skewed. Because obviously people leaving the restaurant probably like cheeseburgers. That's why they went to that restaurant. So you're going to want to make sure that you collect data that represents a good representative target audience. And so this is something that's very difficult to do in a lot of cases, especially if you're doing in-person studies, but something you definitely need to consider. So for collecting your data, you're going to want to see what data will you need and what data will you not need. Sometimes data is frankly useless. Where is the data located? Is it publicly available? Do you need to contact the developer? Do you need to create the data set yourself? How will you obtain it? And when you do obtain it, how do you make sure that it's secure? When I say secure, sometimes the data you collect has personally identifiable information that would be dangerous if it were to get hacked or leaked out to the outside world. So you're going to want to think about how you can keep it secure. And then finally, how will you analyze and interpret this data? So there are two types of data that's really used in studies ranging from software engineering to computer science to history studies. And these types of data are primary and secondary data. And for primary data, you can think of that as data that's observed or collected from first-hand purposes of the study. And second-hand data is data that's collected by someone else, usually in the past, likely for some other purpose. So an example of primary and secondary data would be this. So say you're studying, you're doing research on the history of the Battle of Iwo Jima. If you were to interview somebody who fought there and they were to tell you what it was like, that would be primary data. They would give you a first-hand account of what it was like to be there. So again, that would be an example of primary data. Secondary data, if you're studying that battle, might be you reading a newspaper clipping about the battle. It might be you reading a soldier's diary that was there. It would be something like that. And so you'd be getting the information secondhand. So you wouldn't be talking to the person that was there. You'd be looking at the material that was written about that event. So that would be an example of secondary data. Okay. And so this is just another example I have here about what I just explained. Let's see. So here's some typical examples of primary versus secondary data. And so usually what happens is for primary data, it's focusing on the problem at hand. And for secondary, you might be focusing on other problems. Getting the primary information is usually a fairly difficult task. Like I said, if you're to interview that person that was at the battle, you may need to travel there, you may need to talk to them. Whereas if you're reading newspaper clippings, you can just Google that and you can find that information. Getting primary information is generally costly, where for secondary it's generally low because you're just referencing other works out there. And then along with cost, it usually takes a long time to get primary data and shorter time to get secondary data. So I would say take a moment and think about what are some differences in primary and secondary data you can think about in computing. And what some of those examples could be. So for me, some of the primary examples I could think about in computing is if you were to interview a developer. Maybe a secondary example would be you citing a paper that had done that study. But I'm sure there are many, many, many other examples of primary, secondary data that you folks can all think of. And so that's it for the lecture for today. There are two activities I'd like for people to do this week. And the first is something that you'll post inside of the discussion forum. So I'm sorry, the Dropbox. I'll just scroll down to the bottom of this right now. And so this would be week 5.1 research planning. And for this, what you'll do is you'll find an FSE paper from the latest FSE conference. You'll look at the data they collected. You'll see how did they get that data? Was it primary or secondary data? What was the data used for? How can the data be improved? And how did they ensure the accuracy of the data? If you can answer these questions really in a half a page or so to a full page, totally fine. Don't spend a ton of time on this activity. This is much more designed for you to just get an idea of data. For this study and like a lot of the other ones, for this activity and for a lot of the other ones, I don't really go out and grade this. This is just something I like for you folks to do. And to check things out along those lines and just get an idea of data collection. So that you can post inside of the 5.1 research planning Dropbox. And the second activity would be for you to create a plan for the data for your project. Now this plan can totally change. I just want you to begin considering the data collection plan. And so what I would like you to do is think about the data you'll need for your project. Think about where and how you'll get it, if it's primary or secondary data, and why you'll choose to use this data and why you'll choose to use either primary or secondary data or vice versa. This is just a plan. If you deviate from this plan, totally fine. And what I'd like you to do is to create this plan and put it inside the discussion board. And so there's a discussion board called in class act discussion. So you can put that in week 5. So you can put that inside of the week 5 discussion. And it would be a good idea for you to review what your classmates have put in for their plan, and maybe for you to even critique it. So again, for this activity, I'm not looking for anything super robust. I'm not looking for you to spend half an hour on it. I'm just looking for you to create an initial plan for your data collection process. Okay, so that's really it for me. So if you folks have any questions, send me a note, and we'll be talking this week. So thanks, everybody.